Fish and Business Development Manager for VQ Communications. I joined in September 23, and the opportunity came up after speaking with Steve. We had worked in different companies together, but connected up in the industry that we've both been in for 20 plus years, where I've worked for a number of different sort of market leading vendors, and saw the opportunity here with VQ as a great way to continue in the space that I really enjoy and pick up on a market that some of which I know, some of which I'm getting to know, but enjoying that all along.
It's great having Graham on the team for the last 18 months or so. I joined the business just over 4 years ago as in a VP of sales role. It was a pretty small team when I joined, 3 or 4 of us, and now we're up to 11 or 12, growing really well. And it's growing in people skills and capabilities. The lion's share of our business has been in North America, which Giles has been leading and doing a fantastic job. We wanted to try and look at more of a global view of collaboration market, especially that on-premise space and the air-gap space we work in, and grow outside of that.
There are fundamental differences between on-prem and cloud. On-prem requires investment for the infrastructure to deliver that, versus a cloud environment where there's effectively no cost of entry and it's subscription service for using cloud service. There are fundamental differences, once again, in the operation of that. The infrastructure and the upfront costs are different, but then how they operate in many ways as well is different. On-prem, typically from the background that I've been in, effectively drives and has been driven by a standard and standards-based technology. And that standards-based technology often involves people that are knowledgeable and skilled to deliver and drive those types of services. But with this standards-based means that effectively anything that is also standards-based can connect and use that. Now, with the involvement of cloud, there are standards, but many different types of standards. And that involves the need to have interoperability between those particular standards that they have in that cloud space. By the time you add the cost of entry, which is a lower point with cloud, by the time you then look at using different cloud services versus something more standards-based from an infrastructure and on-prem perspective, it's probably actually a cost factor that is never considered when people are looking at that. The market share of what on-prem can deliver versus cloud, there is still a large base of customers that require the need to use on-premise. I think COVID drove a lot of people to using cloud services because they had to. It was the service that they could quickly attach to and actually start to use. But then we're seeing a trend and a change in that space that means that customers are now using and considering using more on-prem services. And that's a message that is coming back out from leadership within Cisco. We're seeing more of an uptake and drive towards on-prem customers, a resurgence in the space that for many, everyone thought was a dead space, and it's not. It's definitely a live, growing space and a big opportunity.
I was going to mention, Graham, you touched on the ability to pivot and act quickly with cloud. So that's a massive advantage. And obviously with pandemic and COVID, all of the cloud UC operators saw huge growth almost overnight, where everybody worldwide is being told go and work from home. And it allows organizations to de-skill, solve CSR problems, reduce rack space and move workload to the cloud. But what it doesn't do is some of those things that you were just talking about there around the data sovereignty and being in control of your own destiny. What happens when a cloud service provider fails? Once you've relied on the cloud for everything, what happens when the cloud isn't there anymore? What does that do for your business and your ability to operate? I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for and against, aren't they? And it's about understanding it's a mix of services, ways you deliver capability to your users that enables you to function as a business.
As you say, what fits the organisation. And when we start to drill into where VQ plays and where VQ sits, it's the market space, the particular industry sectors that we have strength in and also see huge uptake. And there are many reasons why those organisations that we work within do not choose cloud. And I think you just touched on one of those points, which is around data sovereignty, but also the ultimate security and assurance that the service is going to be around. They can have that service delivered by their own people, managed and monitored in their control. And there have been some horror stories around cloud services where there have been major security breaches or there's been some outages in service. We're certainly seeing an uptake of customers now that are looking for more resilience, so they build in the additional data centers and reserves and high availability for ensuring those services are up and running and available for the entire personnel across those organizations that we're delivering in. With VQ, we are on Cisco's global price list. So effectively, we are a Solution Plus partner with Cisco. So from an integration and interoperability perspective within the Cisco infrastructure, which is Cisco's meeting server, the interop is already baked in, is already part of the service and solution. We're not a third party that requires any sort of gateway service to operate. It's an inherent part of how customers that are using the Cisco meeting server are now able to deliver effectively their meeting services, which is their meeting scheduling and management of those meetings, as well as also device management across the organization's estate. There is no requirement for any gateway service or interop to deliver VQ. Some cloud services require a gateway or interop service to make that work, so that if they're using a meeting room, for example, and they want to connect into certain cloud services, then there's a requirement to have some sort of gateway from what I mentioned earlier on, which is the standards world, into a proprietary standards world. And those two things, when combined, mean that you have to have an interop that makes that work. So we are seamless in how we deliver and where we work within the Cisco space.
I think we can extend that a little bit further, Graham. In terms of being standards-based, we're also managing the Cisco video devices and the capabilities that are inherent within those devices in being able to communicate and talk to those other platforms that you mentioned that are proprietary. Things that we've got within our hybrid calendar connector, for example, the ability to read calendar invites and then display one button to push notifications on devices, not only for those CMS calls that we schedule and manage, but calls that are coming in as scheduled for WebEx and Zoom and Teams. It isn't interoperability, is it? It's about making the environment that we're running and operating be able to communicate out to some of those other services that people might want to book and bring together.
The end user message is simplicity. Ultimately, it's completely transparent in what platform they're connecting into or what device that needs to connect into. And that hybrid meeting calendar service that we are delivering is going to add a lot of value in the space when businesses have then decided what platforms they're using. And there's going to be a mix of on-prem and cloud. Some customers go all cloud and stay there. And those customers where the hybrid space is in their sites, as you mentioned, Steve, so that hybrid calendar and how that operates, certainly to the end user, is a very powerful tool and just simplifies the whole process of how they select and organise and manage meetings.
The costs and effort required to manage an on-premise solution typically means that you've got to have servers or virtualization environment. You have to be able to patch versions of software, whether that's the VQ software or CMS or other things, whereas cloud is an evergreen solution, isn't it? So when you've got cloud, the cloud service provider is always updating their platform, they've got regular release cycles and what have you. So actually, as an organization, you don't really have to do much. Your overheads go down, but you're also reliant on a service provider that delivers a service in a particular way, rather than being able to shape and craft the solution to meet your own business requirements. So whether that's Zoom, WebEx or Teams, your flexibility and the scope for customizing that is pretty limited. Whereas actually what we're finding is organizations and agencies want to be able to deliver services in the way that they want to be able to deliver them.
Biggest misconception is on-prem is dead. On-prem for collaboration is certainly not dead. There are many vendors that were in the space that are no longer in that space. Polycom is certainly one of those vendors that had a huge amount of investment and development team delivering their MCUs. Polycom made a strategic decision years ago to actually remove that from their portfolio and focus everything towards cloud because they could see the emergence of cloud. Now, there's a reason for them doing that, which means that they focus on other areas of their business, which until obviously going through various different acquisitions means that they focused heavily towards endpoints and devices rather than infrastructure. Whereas Cisco maintained consistency once they purchased Tandberg, and within that as well came a huge amount of skill and knowledge from many years in the space of on-prem. They've continued that and obviously see that they have a market. And once you start to understand what that market space is and why the customers need to stay in that way, it really strengthens the point about keeping everything on-prem. Many customers, even defense customers, for example, where they cannot or will not move to using cloud, should have been dead many years ago. There are many customers out there that are still hanging on and using that because they cannot or will not move to anything that Microsoft has to offer that gives them the assurance and security they need for collaboration. Is the market for on-prem dead? No, it isn't. It's actually expanding and growing for the reasons that we can see, which include the need to have that choice of building an environment that fits and works specific to the customer and focusing on why they need that in a secure way. Data sovereignty is very key, and even if major data centers are built within regions, there's still question marks that get raised by many of the customers that we deal with because they cannot have the assurance that they get the security. Maybe that evergreen environment doesn't suit them. Constant updates and constant concern about, is that service going to look the same to me tomorrow as it did today, without any consultation or checking. Those changes happen outside their control. When the customer has control and can change the environment that fits them, if they choose to add or remove anything, that's their choice. And that's the reason why I think it's worth just focusing on the fact that customers that have on-prem and continue to invest in on-prem, it's not going away and it won't go away overnight. There's a huge opportunity for business in that space.
I think you make a really good point there. I was talking about those legacy platforms still in use. I had a call with somebody at Cisco the other day that was talking about a customer who was still using Kodian MCUs. People take a long time to shift and change as well. I talked earlier and said, it's really quick for people to migrate to cloud and switch services. But actually organizations, especially in the areas that we work, they don't move particularly fast. Nation by nation, market by market, even within a defense market within one country, they've got different security classifications of calls. So you might have top secret calls, classified calls, non-classified calls, just to standardize some of that terminology. On-prem or air-gap networks vary at those classifications. At an unclassified level, you could use a cloud service provider of choice, but at a top secret level, you're not going to rely on a public cloud service.
We can think of some security issues that we've heard from even just from our local press, where people are using things like WhatsApp to chat and share information through COVID, and how open those platforms are. And they're not actually, in many cases, disabled from users' devices. Though we're talking about chat services, but there are means to obviously collaborate and use those. Whereas the types of customers that require and need higher levels of security and compliance are varieties of different people within the organization in terms of what they can use and how they can use it. Our customers control that data. They're providing the service within an environment entirely theirs, and that is a key factor. It doesn't matter if that's a defense customer or a government customer in terms of the Ministry of Interior or various different judicial organizations. They need to maintain and keep all that information and data to themselves. The security and compliance element is the number one topic in conversation. And when people say prove it, we prove it because we've got many customers in the space. Although it's difficult for us to mention the exact names of our customers because of the nature of who they are. It's more that we can prove this because we're growing year on year. You have a look at the business growth and how we're delivering that into those particular industry sectors that I've just touched on. We're seeing a huge amount of uptake in areas where we know that there are requirements for more classified and secretive conversations within that closed or air-gapped environment that just doesn't fit and doesn't suit the need for them to use any form of service which is cloud-based.
There's a read across on that. We talked about those classifications. You could read that across into the enterprise space as well. Say you're a FTSE 100 or Dow Jones top 10 banking organization. Are you going to talk about mergers and acquisitions and run your board meetings on a public cloud service? Probably not. So you align that to classification levels. Maybe that's top secret classification, but it's in the enterprise space. So you're not going to run those on the cloud, but you're going to run those within your environment. You're going to control it, you're going to manage it. The data sovereignty is really important at that point because those organizations are probably cross-border. So if calls hosted in Germany and the US and somewhere else, what jurisdiction applies to data privacy laws and those sorts of things, where if you keep it on your own infrastructure in your own environment, you haven't got to worry about service providers getting called upon to share information in those different territories. And then if you look at the European market, I think if you look at it's much smaller in terms of nation sizes to the United States and the number of people and the government budgets and that sort of stuff. But what happens if a network goes down or a government serves notice on a service provider and says you're going to cease providing service to nation X? That nation, depending on that platform, makes it really quite difficult for them to continue to operate. So from a security and trust perspective, those nations and organizations need to be confident that when things go bad or there's a big problem, they can continue to operate, as well as worrying about where the data sits, where it resides, who's got rights to call upon it at any particular time. From an administration and somebody running the service, yeah, there's a difference there. You've got to have some level of management of your on-premise environment, but then you probably have of your cloud environment as well. You've still got to onboard users, you've still got to off-board users, you've got to create permissions, you've got to do the customizations to the service. I think it's probably at a slightly higher level in terms of the design of that platform. Is it consuming data center space, VM space, electricity and emissions and what have you within your data centers or your offices environments that actually contribute to CSR reports and criteria that you're trying to hit as a business? There's a whole bunch of operational issues, but really from an end user perspective and what they're consuming and using as tools, it should be transparent.
And you talk, Steve, about customers there or businesses that have a choice and organisations that have a choice. There are many that don't. That in itself means they are locked in. They have to stay in an environment that is in their control. When you have a look at introducing VQ, some of the things that we add in there are around automation of services. We can reduce the admin burden on certain tasks and certain duties that need to happen in managing that environment. How we manage and use our device management and automation to put in information that is used for those running the service. So effectively, we can target the service delivery team, service delivery managers, service delivery directors with a really strong, compelling message. But also then there's the support team that need to see and understand the data, the facts, what's actually happening day on day. And even during live calls, what's actually happening during that event. So they can take action and actually then provide the better operation of that service when they don't have that choice.
The demand for on-premise is going to continue to grow. We're seeing changes from a vendor perspective towards on-premise. There's been a huge marketing push to cloud. It's a big compelling event. It's the next big change, and all the messaging is around recurring revenues, subscription-based services, quick to react, quick to onboard new people, quick to grow. It does leave you out of control. It does leave you with the problems of the things we've been talking about today, the data sovereignty, and that's just going to get worse. And just knowing where your data is and who's in control of it, and then being able to deliver those classifications of service in the current climate is going to get more and more important.
With world events like COVID, when people were driven to using cloud services, that means that there was no choice. And when there is no choice or little choice, naturally, some of the things that were in place before get pushed to one side, not developed because they just weren't able to react and respond quick enough to deliver the service that is now required. Now, I think many years after COVID, the organisations we're dealing with now respond in a more structured and strategic way to decide actually that there are means and ways that we need to secure a lot of things within our organisation. And we've touched on some of those in the conversation before, but the on-prem market is certainly growing. Is it growing in the same meteoric rate that many cloud services had overnight from COVID? No, it's not, but it will get back up to a point where it's starting to pull many businesses away from using cloud services because they have the ability now to deliver that. Rack space, data center space, and obviously the necessary hardware required. There's a cost involved in doing that, but as technology moves forward, then devices and requirements for delivering that are also going to reduce. The space for on-prem is not going away. It will grow, but grow more organically rather than meteorically that we've seen perhaps through COVID and post-COVID as well.
This phrase on-premise paints the picture that you've got a box on somebody's desk or in a comms room in a building. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that. On-premise could easily mean self-hosted, and that could be a private cloud. So you could use a cloud service provider and take your on-premise infrastructure and self-host in a private cloud. And there's different ways of delivering the service without going to a public cloud service. There's this scale, if you like, from yes, it's in a box and it's sitting on my desk and I've got my hands on it and I can control it and I know exactly where it is, right the way down to a cloud service that anybody can operate, anybody can hack, and anybody can listen into, and nobody wants to be there, but nobody really wants to be right at the other end of that scale either, holding onto a server for dear life.
We see it day to day on every news channel about geopolitical tensions that are happening around the globe. And that's therefore driving people to have an understanding of how they collaborate and where they collaborate, and obviously where organisations maybe have even different divisions or different departments or different parts of the business where they're structured and how they're operating, and ensuring that they get the consistency with service. But geopolitically, there are means and reasons why cloud, once again, is not suitable, and a means to host everything within You're seeing the UK government spend more within defence, and that's mirrored and cookie cut across every member country of Europe and also through the Gulf region. Every one of those countries, they need to collaborate, they need to have communications in a way that works for them. And throwing that all up into one big service provider is not going to deliver because of how they operate and data sovereignty within their environment. And there are many countries, for example, in the Middle East and the Gulf region where it's difficult to actually have communications out. Having visited there and tried to join calls on WebEx, for example, you're timed out and your video goes or the audio goes, and then you have to redial in and reconnect in because those cloud services or the internet services are monitored or reduced to avoid that. So those are business decisions in some ways that because of how we sit and where we play, we can start to influence some of the conversations because of how we improve that. I mentioned the types of people that we would position VQ services to in terms of how our licensing model operates, but also what that delivers. We can provide assurance to people managing those services that they can wake up in the morning that the services are on, there's green lights throughout, and ultimately they're delivering their quality. So have that assurance that the on-prem model is operating because we're delivering in that space. Any change will mean that there's a cost involved, but then there's a cost to change for anything you do. So whether you're switching off something which is on-prem and moving purely to cloud or reverting that back and maybe having a hybrid environment, the challenge then comes down to justifying that expenditure. We know that what we deliver means that when you start to focus on business value and the business objectives, we can actually deliver against many of those and exceed that. So I wouldn't say it's a point of non-discussion, but it's certainly one that we can overcome very quickly when we're engaged with a customer.
You've got those organisations at one end of the scale who can't go to cloud. You've got people that just won't or don't want to because they don't particularly like the idea of cloud. And then you've got those organisations that are 100% in and completely bought into a cloud journey. But there's that sort of sweet spot within the middle of saying, what are the business benefits of going one way or the other from a technology perspective, from an end user experience perspective, from a scalability perspective. We've got customers who have got uptimes of multiple years and they come back and look at the server and really ought to upgrade that, but it was working so we didn't, and just runs and run. In terms of sort of scalability and reliability, I think that's probably a problem that people perceived or had with on-premise solutions a number of years ago was how reliable are they? I've got to keep hands on. Oh, the thing's failed, whatever the thing is, and then that's a complete failure for the whole organisation. Let's move to cloud and it's somebody else's problem. But actually, the cloud service providers have problems as well, and they fail. But we've got lots and lots of customers who run services reliably for long periods of time without outages, and it's a platform that you can rely on these days.
On-prem is not for everybody because if you're a small organisation, the cost of building and driving and running and managing something in your own environment is just cost prohibitive. You wouldn't do that. And that's why probably people like Microsoft with things like their Office 365 environment, for example, in that space, it's a subscription license that you just assign X amount of pounds, dollars, or whatever currency that you're in to using that month. And it provides you what you need. Typically, organisations we're dealing with are major public sector organisations, and of which then it's not a case of funding is infinitum, but it's budgeted and factored into how they operate and how they run. It's the larger organisations that we tend to be working with, where we're talking about many tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of users are reliant on the services that we are supporting.